Hey everyone, and welcome to the Contemplative Science Podcast. My name is Jamie, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Mark Miller. Mark, how are you, man?
Hey, Jamie. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm well. I'm looking forward to today.
Yep.
Today, we have lots of guests on the podcast, but it's relatively rare we have sort of hardcore neuroscientists on, which makes today a real treat. We are welcoming none other than Giuseppe Pagnoni, a neuroscientist at the University of Modena and Reggio, Emilia. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff to do with the brain as a predictive model, and much else. But before any of that, Giuseppe, how are you?
Good. Happy to chat with you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So one of the things looking at your work that comes through is you write about inaction, and why inaction is a powerful thing for the brain. When I first sort of came to that, my initial thought was, oh, well, I've been presuming inaction doesn't do anything to the brain. It's sort of baked into the term inaction. But that's actually not quite right. What is that model missing?
So I'm assuming you're talking about inaction with an I, not with an E.
That's right. Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
Inaction, non-action, non-active.
Okay.
Exactly. Not
So,
inaction.
yeah, I think that basically in meditation, and that's, just a hypothesis, but I think it makes sense. A very important component is the fact that we refrain to follow through with confirmative actions to our usual schemes and to whatever drives our behavior as partially conscious motivations, let's say. It's almost, I think, as if the meditative practice, when you sit and you're not moving usually, this kind of sets up a sort of virtual boundary. So where the usual policies or lines of actions that often are chosen simply compulsively are prescribed by the meditative policy, which is we can think about as a superordinate policy. So, but I don't know, this is kind of a free energy active inference jargon. So shall we?
Right,
Yeah,
like
break it down a bit. Break it down a bit if you can.
So basically, in this theoretical scheme of active inference, I'm sure your listeners have already heard about this. But anyway, the idea is that basically all that we do as sentient beings and agents is basically minimize an informational quantity that is free energy. And this can be done either via perception or via action. And the difference between the two is that when we minimize free energy by infer a certain state of the world, and that belongs to the process of recognition, basically we change our mind in order to make it fit better with what our senses are telling us.
Yeah.
The other way, which belongs to organisms that can issue actions, is to change the world to make it better conform to what we expect. So the meditative practice is kind of strange because the overt action is inhibited in a sense.
Yeah.
So it seems that at the outset it seems like a passive state, but I don't think it's passive at all. I think this inaction is a very active state.
Yeah.
Because it requires it's actually an action to prevent yourself from acting. It's not something that comes automatically. And for me, it has something to do with the inferential process taking a sort of inward epistemic turn. Because in the, please stop me if something is not clear. Just.
I'll let you do that, Jamie, because
Yeah,
this is very much in my research neighborhood, so it's all very clear to me. So, Jamie, you be the layman and tell us what you don't understand.
Yeah,
Yes,
one thing I
please.
just want to pick up on there
Yes.
is you said that we sort of have two options. We can either conform the world to meet our perceptions,
Yes.
or we can sort of change
Well,
our
to meet our expectations.
Right. So can you break down kind of
Yes.
what the options are there and what you mean by expectations?
Yeah. So basically, so the idea is that basically everything, all our cognitive activity is basically an inference that is made based on prior beliefs, which are though continuously updated every time we interact with our world. So our prior beliefs every time become posterior beliefs after a new sensory evidence, and basically these beliefs are expectations about what we're going to encounter next. So this idea, if we talk about perception first, this idea has quite deep roots. Of course, it was present in Kant's philosophy, the idea of the a priori or priors, and but it became much more full-fledged with Hermann von Helmholtz, which basically proposed the notion that perception was an inferential process, that is trying to guess what were the causes of our sensations, basically, because perception is seen as the process of going back from our sensation to a guess about the causes of this sensation. So it's a process of recognition. And this is perception in the sense as an inference process. We could explain it in lay terms as trying to select our hypothesis about the causes of our current sensation, choosing the one that best fits with those sensations. So in the sense, we change our mind about what is causing our sensation until we find the one where the discrepancy is minimized.
Yeah, there's a big problem here, right? The big problem is that you can have bad beliefs. So that means you can have a funny experience of the world, because it turns out our experience of the world is really very close to our beliefs about the world. And if you have sort of bad beliefs, then you can have challenging experiences.
So what's an example? So what's an example of this just functioning normally and successfully, and then what's an example, Mark, of that bad belief playing out?
Should I answer, or do you want?
Yeah,
to
go
answer,
ahead.
Mark?
Yeah,
Okay.
Giuseppe, you go.
Okay. Well, so the idea is that the system always works following minimization of free energy, or always follows the same Bayesian mechanics, even in pathological conditions. The problem is that if you have a bad model, a model which is not really in line with the world, that does not match very well the world, and this model is prevented to be updated efficiently by your interaction with the world, then you're going to have a situation where your beliefs becomes refractory to what the world tells you. Yeah. And so you're going to be switching over to basically a self-fulfilling prophecy mode. So you have these very firm beliefs, very precise, and you act so to bring the world in alignment with those beliefs.
Yeah, here's a good example. If you believe in flat Earths, if you believe the Earth is flat, and you believe strongly enough, and then you start building, worse then is you build a bunch of communities on top of this, so that your social world and your relationships and your hobbies are all flat Earth centric things. It becomes very difficult then to change your mind about that. And so what you do is you change the world to better conform. So self-fulfilling prophecy, you end up hanging out with flat Earth people, you go to flat Earth conventions, you avoid any evidence that tells you the Earth is actually round, and so you can get stuck. You can get stuck in little cul-de-sacs of belief.
Right, and this is not. I mean, we should not think that this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy modality is wrong in an absolute fashion. No, it's something that it's a modality that is perfectly complementary to the other one, because there are situations where the information that the world gives you is very noisy, is not reliable, and so in this case, it's better for the agent to rely on its prior knowledge, on its prior beliefs, to conduct his life, in a viable way.
Yeah, and
so
actually,
they're really complementary.
Some pathologies are characterized by updating too fast, being too fluid. You want to be able to be a bit rigid.
Exactly.
Schizophrenia might be an example where you're updating too fluidly. So you're changing your mind, or you're starting to have really ungrounded beliefs arise because you don't have enough. You don't have enough rigidity. So the rigidity isn't necessarily bad.
Right. I also think once I had this thought, which was it was interesting for me. I don't know if it's interesting for other people, but that in traditional societies there were the roles of elders and of young member of the community. They're very different. So the elder has to kind of provide the orienting guidelines.
Yes.
For the people who grew up. So by necessity, they have to be quite firm and refractory to revision. Otherwise, they won't function as a guideline.
No, that's right. And then the young people are the rebels. They are the one to be wild and weird and change.
Exactly, and they have to
push
provide
against each other. You find optimality. Oh, I
exactly.
like this.
So they have to provide the necessary measure of novelty to be able to make the overall model of the world shared by the community more flexible in the face of inevitable changes that always occur.
I just think immediately like Elvis Presley coming on the scene, and all of the old people saying this is not music, and all of the young people saying no, for sure this is the best music, and then they're working it out, to see what will music be next. And you don't want too much of one or too much of the other. You sort of want the push.
Right.
It's very interesting.
Right.
So then the question is, let's tie that back into the meditation process.
Yes, nice.
How does that interact with that function?
Okay, so the meditation process is quite interesting. I think it's characterized by two main features. One is the sort of immobility, which is kind of strange, and the other one is a kind of a skilled deployment of attention. These are basically shared by every type of meditative practice. It's also peculiar if you think about this. In the last 20 years, there has been a lot of scientific research on the spontaneous activity of the mind when we are at rest. So this has come to the fore of neuroscience research with the discovery of the so-called default mode network, which is a collection of brain areas that display high metabolic activity when we are not engaged apparently in nothing. So we are basically at rest. And the activity of this circuit has been associated with the spontaneous activity of the mind, let's say the flow of consciousness or mind wandering, etc., etc. So there is this naive idea, especially when we first start to approach these meditative practices, that the ideal condition is the one where you are able not to fall prey of mind wandering, you know, of having a complete empty mind. And but that begs the question, if when we are at rest, we are actually the probability of mind wandering increases sharply, because that's what happens. You know, if you are engaged, I don't know, like if you're skiing downhill on a very difficult slope, you cannot have a lot of thoughts running in your mind, because you have to pay a lot of attention to it. So how is it possible, this screensaver, how is it possible that, why would it make sense that if the aim of meditation was to realize and act a completely empty mind, you put yourself exactly in that situation where mind wandering increases?
Yes, interesting.
It's strange, right?
Strange.
So I think that, well, it's not me that think. I mean, a lot of people think this, that mind wandering actually is a process, is a faculty that we have that has very high adaptive value, because during mind wandering we can explore counterfactual scenarios, we can test virtually modes and behavior in a way that we are not without suffering necessarily the consequences of that. So we can test a lot of things. So I think that mind wandering is actually the default epistemic modality that takes place when we are not engaged in the usual, habitual, and often compulsive modality of selecting policies purely based on their pragmatic value. So here I probably have to explain what pragmatic and epistemic value means. So let's open a parenthesis. So in active inference, perception and action are performed by basically minimizing this quantity, this free energy, which is an approximation of surprise, but relying basically only on the present and past observations. We all know that sentient beings, though, have the capability of planning into the future and deciding courses of action. So to do that, actually you have to, the model needs to be endowed with the capability of foreseeing future observations. And basically compute a kind of free energy of the future, which is expected free energy. Now, the selection of a line of action of a policy is then performed by choosing the policy that best minimizes this expected free energy. The interesting part is that this functional can be decomposed in two it can actually be decomposed in various ways, but for our purposes it can be decomposed in two components. One is the pragmatic value of a line of a course of action, and the other one is its epistemic value. What are those? Basically, a policy with a high pragmatic value is a policy that conforms very well to our desires, to what to the request of our phenotype as an organism. While a policy with a high epistemic value is a policy that is likely to accrue useful information from the environment, so that it can improve the quality of our model in the future.
Right. So you're either picking behaviors here in order to get to the place you want to be, or to figure out more about the world so that you can get to the place that you want to be. So one is pragmatic insofar as you're choosing it because it's useful, and one is epistemic because you're choosing it because you learn more, like this.
Exactly. So, and the minimization of expected free energy strikes a good balance between these two components. So we try to select the courses of action that have both high epistemic value and a high pragmatic value. But of course, the balance may switch according to the specific situation. You know, in a certain moment, it may switch more towards the epistemic side. In another moment, more towards the pragmatic side. I think the meditation is a kind of superordinate policy for us that we choose to enact. And this policy involves immobility. And this immobility kind of blocks, suspends, in a way, the usual policies with high pragmatic value. And these are basically what? Like to go towards, to try to get what we want, and to push away or, avoid what we don't like.
Yeah.
So, and this is interesting because, for instance, in the Zen tradition, there is this term referring to meditation, which is mushotoku, which means nothing to be attained. So it's almost basically like saying, forget about policies with high pragmatic value for the time where you are sitting in meditation.
This is not about getting anything. Don't go get. What we want is update. Update, don't go get.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting because it even says another term that it's used is mukodoku, which means no merit. There is not even a merit. It's not like you're sitting because, okay, for that moment, for the time being, I'm not running after things that I like, but even I'm not even sitting here expecting to get some merit for the future.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. It's even for what concerns expected free energy, there is a kind of suspension of this usual modality. So,
Jamie, did you want to jump in there? Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add. So it sounds like our normal modus operandi, our normal way of walking around the world, is looking around and saying, well, what can I get? What can I gain that helps me conform the world to kind of my expectations? But then you sit down to meditate, and as you said, it's kind of strange because you don't. One, it leaves lots of time for mind wandering, and two, you're carving out time where you're actually doing the opposite. You're building the muscle of, no, I'm actually not looking to conform the world to meet my expectations. And my question was going to be around emotional regulation, because there's a lot of research that implies meditators find themselves more able to cope with high anxiety states, for example. And I was wondering why that would be the case on this model.
So perhaps I think that emotion concerns especially the interplay between mental state and bodily states. So normally when we get a thought, let's say, which let's say it's an anxiogenic thought, that creates a sort of bodily tension somewhere in our body, that we are eager to resolve, we are eager to suppress, usually by actions that are, I don't know, maybe I lit up a cigarette, maybe I scratch my head, I don't know, something like that, okay? During meditation, not only is those movements prescribed, not only are those movements prescribed, but also there is a heightened attention towards the bodily sensations. So you actually, the sensation that corresponds to this heightened tension, this urge, let's say, surface very much to consciousness. And so I think that at that point, two things happen. One, you learn that, well, you become much more aware. You become much more aware of what that thought is triggering in your body and what your body is telling you to do in order to remove the tension. And second, since the habitual resolving action is suspended, I think that this, with time, also triggers another type of surprise minimization, which is affected through the action of the autonomic nervous system, for instance. So there is a kind of renormalization of this tension that normally you would resolve with compulsive actions.
So this is like you have some tension from a habit, let's say, some social anxiety. And normally the way that you resolve that tension is you leave the party because that's easier.
For instance,
it's easier than updating your model.
Right.
But what you're doing in meditation in part is you might just be changing your relationship with that tension so that the tension no longer drives the system directly, but rather can be consumed in a different way where you can say,
yes,
maybe in a more top-down metacognitive way, you can say, yes, well, I have some pressure, but actually I love being social as well. So I'm just going to sort of be at peace with the fact that I have a bit of tension, and I'm going to just go and talk with somebody until I feel it sort of resolves itself, because always tension has a rise and a fall. So I'll just wait like this.
Right. And you can also, and it does not need to be even that cognitive. I mean, if you don't resolve that tension with the usual compulsive actions, and you still have that heightened attention on your body, you may be able to observe and then to learn that the tension is not permanent, that just waiting a little bit, it will subside.
Yes.
So you learn, you unlearn the compulsive action in a sense, the necessity of the compulsive action. So
is that the same as what's happening with mind wandering, with inaction? You are learning about the dynamics of mind wandering by sitting with them. So actually you want more mind wandering dynamics so that you can learn about your mind wandering dynamics, so that your mind wandering dynamics stop being sharp little knives that stick you in the eye about how bad you are or how bad the world is. In the same way as you don't necessarily get rid of the anxiety, but you have to have anxiety in order to learn about anxiety so that anxiety stops being so pokey. Same thing with mind wandering, perhaps.
That's a great point. I think that is definitely a part of the process. I think I agree very much with that. Also, another part is that these episodes of spontaneous thoughts that naturally surface during meditation are a kind of a chance of learning about yourself.
Exactly. And it's all about learning. It's all about learning.
It's also, I feel if we think about the myth of Ulysses.
Nice.
When Ulysses asks his man to tie himself to the mast of the ship in order to be able to hear the song of the sirens. I think meditation is something like that. So we tie ourselves in the meditative posture in order of being able to hear the song of our own sirens.
Without crashing the boat.
Without crashing the boat. So, in this sense, mind wandering is an epistemic opportunity, and what is important is not to get rid of them, but the fact that there is a natural alternation between the meditative presence and attention and episodes of mind wandering. This alternation is a kind of an epistemically rich dynamics that increases our insights into the unconscious patterns and motivation that drive or orient our behavior.
Yes.
So it's in summary, this mind wandering may not be an impediment, but actually the sheer material on which meditation works.
We wrote a paper, Giuseppe. I don't know if you read our paper, Losing Ourselves, where we look at depersonalization and meditation.
I did. I liked it very much.
Thanks for that. So we do something similar there with affectivity, which is in depersonalization, if people don't know at home, it's a sort of dissociative disorder. One of the key features is that the affective system or the feeling system gets dampened in some way.
Yes.
And we were making the argument that actually it's really valuable to have even really challenging emotions, especially in the meditative trajectory, because it's only by having challenging emotions do you model the emotions such that you can transcend and then better control. But you have to have the problem in order to transcend the problem. So you don't want to get rid of the problem. So anybody who's starting meditation at home, just remember, you don't want to have no mind wandering. Don't start with no mind wandering. Don't think that that's the aim. You want to have lots of mind wandering, but you want to be mindful of your mind wandering so that you can learn what the mind is like. That's where you get all of the benefit, is learning more about yourself rather than trying to bend yourself or shoehorn yourself into some state. I love that. I love that.
No, I agree. One thing, actually, if I can ask a question to you, because the paper was very interesting, and I like the idea that basically the subjective feeling in terms of valence and negative or positive feelings basically represents a tracking of how well an agent does in reducing prediction error.
Yeah.
With respect to the expected rate of reduction. Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think, though, that the phenomenology of affect is necessary for that? Why couldn't the system just do that without actually the phenomenology of affective states?
You know what? I'll tell you, I have an easy but unsatisfying answer. So my easy but unsatisfying answer is because that's how humans evolved to make use of that kind of information. So evolution found all sorts of ways for us to compute this information. I think in our case, affective embodied dynamics just turned out to be part of the story about how we track when we are doing better or worse than at predicting in the world. So I don't know exactly, because of course you can make a robot that can do this and it doesn't have any phenomenology. But
Right.
in our case, our complex affective dynamics turned out to allow us to optimize in this way by tracking when we're doing well and when we're doing poorly, and then adjusting us so that we keep doing well or we avoid increasingly doing poorly. I'm not sure though. Do you have a more satisfying answer? Maybe?
Well, I was thinking. I wonder if the changing, the internal body landscape is a kind of a way to mark the need for precision updating for an extended time.
Yeah. Because you have slower dynamics in the body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Of course.
So basically, you scaffold this information more onto the body, which has longer time constants and with respect to neural activity.
Yeah. I completely agree. And what an easy hack.
Right.
Instead of needing to process information at two different speeds, you just have it in two parts of the system. One that's by nature slower, the other one by nature is faster. Right. And then you get a little bit slow dynamics and a little bit fast dynamics meeting and playing out together. I mean, it's very cheap. And as we know, the predictive brain loves to be cheap when it can.
Right.
I like that a lot.
As cheap as it can.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Right. Jamie, did you have something? I thought I saw you about to jump in as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if you guys could, so Mark, if you could just give sort of the one-liner of what the paper was about and translates.
Yes, well, okay. So here's the quick point. It's become a little bit popular to say potentially that depersonalization or dissociative disorders might be very close to enlightenment. That maybe even the Buddha had a dissociative disorder because he didn't feel like a self anymore. And we have dissociative disorders where people say they feel like they are not themselves. They feel like the world is like a dream. These are things that you hear also in the Buddhist Dharma tradition. And so some people have, I think, made the mistake to think that disassociation and something like the Buddhist idea of enlightenment are really, really close. So what we wanted to do was we took the same framework that Giuseppe is working with, the active inference or predictive processing framework, which is a really lovely computational framework for thinking about some of these things. And then we wanted to look at what was the profile for dissociative disorders and what was the profile for what we think enlightened processing might look like. And then we wanted to compare them. Are they actually very similar or are they different? And our hypothesis and our conclusion was that actually they're polar opposites. They're not anywhere near each other. Disassociation, even though you have you might say similar things, they are really at opposite ends of a spectrum. Disassociation has much less control in the system. A wise, enlightened mind has lots more control. Disassociation has some dampening of affect. So here's the big take home. Disassociation has a dampening of affect. Because when you have a trauma, you get a kind of emotional airbag that gets deployed and it quiets your emotions down so that you don't keep getting hurt by how bad the trauma is. And that's one of the things that can lead to disassociation, right? I think that's a very folk idea. I think we all get that. For meditators, long-term meditators, it's not that they have less affectivity. Actually, it's just that they understand their own affectivity so deeply that it gets processed in a different way. It's still very much alive. And in fact, when you look to the brain, you see the affective dynamical networks are bigger, they're fatter, they're more interdependent. In the dissociative disorder, they're smaller and weaker and less interdependent. So you actually have better affective processing. It just doesn't drive the system in the same pathological ways anymore. So really they turn out to be quite different from one another. That was our conclusion anyway.
Even though the aesthetic might be similar, hence people.
Yeah, well, the phenomenology is even very different because people with disassociation are in a lot of pain and it's very scary to be in a disassociative state. When we get people who have sort of deep meditative attainments, of course, they feel really good. Usually it's euphoric, not dysphoric. So the phenomenology is very different, but the things they say sound the same. That's the mystery. because one says, I don't feel like myself, and the Buddha says, well, I don't feel like myself either. Well, one of them is being burned up by it, and the other one was saying, oh my goodness, finally I'm not a self. I mean, it was so much weight to carry around myself. And then the dissociative disorder, people are saying, oh my God, I don't have a self, and I'm freaking out about it because I need to feel like a self. So that's the mystery, but it ends up just being semantic, because the phenomenology and the computation are really quite different, we think.
And yeah, so to come back to our original question about the relationship between mind wandering and meditation, that also in the same spirit, I would like to perhaps point to another another issue that I think is often misunderstood about meditation, and it is the issue of being in the present.
Nice.
So I think that, again, when we first start meditation, we think that maybe we should only focus on the present, and but if that means to seal out everything that it's not the present moment, that means to shrink our experience to a kind of the experience that a very, very simple organism like an amoeba would be. So that means to forcefully prevent us from the full scope of the past and of the future, to enrich our present.
Yes.
And actually, in the other paper that you wrote, Mark, which is the predictive dynamic of happiness, I found something similar when you talked about the global error dynamics.
Yeah, global dynamics, exactly.
Exactly. So you said that, for instance, in addiction, you privilege the person, the patient who's addicted, privileges basically the error minimization for things that are for rewards that are very close in time.
Yes, that's right.
And,
now appeal. Even Mark Lewis calls it now appeal in addiction.
Now appeal. There you go.
Long-term addicts have a strong now appeal. They are fastened in the now, because now is the place for the drug seeking and the drug taking. It's not, and in fact, the pathology is that they don't have necessarily, neurodynamically, the past and the future are less available for making their present decisions. So they actually end up acting pathologically because they don't have the whole spectrum of time available to them.
Exactly. So you're
Giuseppe. I like this a lot.
You're enslaved by the present.
Yeah, that's right.
In behavioral economics, there is this notion, well, also I think in behavioral neuroscience, this notion of reward delay discounting.
That's right.
Which is the phenomenon by which you perceive rewards that are farther down the future as with less value compared to rewards that are closer to the present. So, for instance, if you ask the average person, would you prefer $50 in a month or $10 now?
Yeah.
Most of the people say $10 now, which is not a rational choice.
Yes.
But because the value is discounted more as it is located more into the future. So I think that modern society actually has emphasized this trend. And possibly this is why mindfulness has become so widespread, because it aligns, if perceived in this way, it aligns very well with this living the present notion that is get all your all the things that you like right now. And
we need to write a paper, Giuseppe. Let's write a paper. I love this
Okay.
idea that addiction is a kind of being enslaved by the now. So
Mhm.
if meditation is working right, we should imagine that you avoid that end. But what does it mean then to be present without being enslaved by the moment is a more complicated it's more complicated than it might sound. And in fact, it's right in the word, right? Because mindfulness is sati, which means remembering. It's sort of
Mhm.
like remembering, which has a
Right.
sort of protension and pretension quality to
Exactly.
it. You have to know
Exactly.
what to do next based on what happened before. That's actually what mindfulness means. So your discernment of now is being supported by a
Right.
really long view.
Yes. I think so. In this sense, I think that uh, meditation is a kind of a skilled way of it's a skilled way of, I wouldn't say thinking, but it it is more about, it is not about, you know, sealing yourself into the present, but allowing the present to become permeable to
Yeah.
the suggestion both from the past and from the future.
So that's like
And
discernment. That sounds like
right,
discernment to me.
right,
To
right.
be intelligent. I
And
like I like Dogen here, right? Dogen said if you meditate and you become more stupid, you've done it wrong. You should be more smart by meditation. You know, you shouldn't become
right,
yogurt where you don't know what to do
right,
anymore. You should become really good at knowing what to do if you're meditating right.
right, right.
Yeah, good.
And I think that meditative practice may represent, it's done well, a kind of an antidote to this idea of being, of this trend towards more and more increasing delay discounting
Yes.
bias.
Yes.
Because you
Very
sit,
nice.
let's say, boringly without doing anything. So you really block that type of compulsive behavior.
Yes.
Um, so this is another, you know, pet peeve of mine to go against the simple idea of
Yes.
living in a. Unfortunately, these of course these notions have all, you know, a solid base in the traditional scriptures and tradition where they came from, but they tend to be, I think they tend to be misinterpreted quite easily.
Yes, I agree. Giuseppe, before we lose you, because we're coming up towards the end of time, I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you just a personal practice question. Um, has your research impacted your practice practically? And is there anything we can sort of take from our discussion today that might be a kind of practical suggestion to anybody who is practicing at home? Have you found that sort of permeability between your research and your own meditative practice? Has it impacted your practice? And has it led you to any kind of good advice for people in a sort of quick way about what they might do in their own practice, given your research? What do you think?
Yes. Okay. So I'll be honest. Honest without. Okay. The it has perhaps in a way that it sometimes it's good to go against what the prescribed way of doing meditation is. Sometimes,
Yes.
sometimes it's good to explore. For instance, and I think that it's just following for some time the wrong way is very helpful to
Yes, it is.
recognize the right way. Because if you only stick to what you think is the right way, you may be always off track, really. So one thing that I try to do when I sit in meditation, for instance, at first, the practice I follow is Zazen in the tradition of Zen Soto, and there is this idea, this notion that in Zazen you should be very very present and also with quite an active posture, but that too is very prone to be misunderstood. because there's a risk of being too tense or too stiff or, too active. So I came to the provisional conclusion that really there is no standard except the standard that you make during the course of practice. In the sense, the optimal balance between, activity and passivity, or tension and relaxation, it's something that you have to work out, to negotiate yourself during the practice. You cannot think about it. You cannot say, I have to be 70% relaxed and 30%. No,
Yes.
It's something that you every day, and it depends on your daily condition. You have to negotiate every day that.
Yes.
And the other thing that I found interesting, but I'm still working on, is that since I don't sleep a lot during the night, so I am quite prone to being drowsy during meditation. One thing I noticed that I found it quite interesting is that when you start to get drowsy, there is a sort of tension that comes with it. And sometimes trying to fight that tension
makes you more drowsy.
Makes it worse.
Yes.
And if you actually try to relax that tension, you don't come to that condition where you lose consciousness abruptly. You kind of stay in a kind of a twilight zone for a while, which is not ideal. It's not ideal, because I think it's better, to be present and to be more awake. But it's also part of that learning about yourself. I think that if you only try, to follow rigidly some prescription about how meditation should be, you don't allow yourself to that knowledge.
Yeah, wonderful.
Giuseppe, thank you so much for that. There was so much in there.
Thank you.
And I really, really appreciate you coming on. Everyone at home, I hope you enjoyed listening to that half as much as we enjoyed recording it. And Giuseppe, thank you again.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun. I hope it was not too confusing.
This has been the Contemplative Science Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, we'll be back next week.